Hello there, you're watching World News Midnight Edition coming to you live from Algiers. Next are today's top stories. UN envoy says progress is made on Afghan women's rights in the health sector after talks with Taliban. Dozens of Peruvians have been injured as deadly protests continue after the removal of Pedro Castillo as president. Also in our news, Germany is under growing pressure to provide Leopard tanks to Kiev, but says it has yet to make a decision. And finally, for the first time in 2 years without COVID-19 restrictions, Chinese families gathered for the traditional Lunar New Year's Eve dinner. Hello again and welcome to the program. Fast in our topical news, a Palestinian man was killed in the occupied West Bank, rising the number of martyrs to 18, including 4 children. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, the 42-year-old Tariq Ma'ali was killed after the Zionist forces opened fire on him near the Palestinian village of Kafr Nama, west of Ramallah.
I was prevented from getting to the body, but I got very close to where it was. But he was dead, not injured, as I was informed by the Israeli paramedic who was there.
I went to see him after they went to work. So they told me that Tarek had left. And they don't know. It seems that the army had stopped him, and they don't know what happened. Then they told me he was martyred. My love, may his soul rest in peace.
And in the same context, Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh underlined in a letter to the UN and all international human rights organizations that Zionist occupation's crimes against Palestinians should be condemned and serious efforts should be made to put an end to them. Shtayyeh held the occupation authorities entirely accountable for these crimes. Similarly, the Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs called on countries to submit their legal dispositions to the International Court of Justice on the legality of the Zionist colonial occupation of Palestinian land and its impact on all rights. To another just cause now in Western Sahara, after the re-election of Brahim Ghali as Secretary General of the Polisario Front, the Election Commission announced the official list of candidates for membership of the National Secretariat, consisting of 181 members. The Elections Commission announced the start of the electoral process on Saturday at around midday until 3 p.m., provided that the Commission begins the counting process directly. To Algeria now. Algerian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Mtala Mamra, received on Saturday U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs, Michelle Sisson, as part of her working visit to Algeria. The talks focused on bilateral relations and prospects for strengthening strategic dialogue and economic cooperation between Algeria and the United States of America. The two sides also discussed a number of issues related to regional and international developments, as well as various aspects related to multilateral diplomacy.
We work together to uphold the UN Charter, to lift up the most vulnerable populations, now also working together in Geneva at the Human Rights Council. So this is my first visit to Algeria, the beginning of 3 days of meetings and consultations with our ambassador, with the government of Algeria, with the United Nations team here to look at how the US and Algeria can work not only bilaterally, but multilaterally to address these important issues.
Still with Algeria-related news, Algerian Minister of Trade and Export Promotion, Mr. Kamal Rizig, accompanied by the Mauritanian Minister of Trade and Industry, Handicrafts and Tourism, Lamrabat Weld Benahi, supervised this Saturday in the Mauritanian capital Nouakchott the inauguration of the Algerian-Mauritanian Economic Forum. The business forum is organized on the sidelines of the Algerian Products exhibition in Nouakchott, whose activities opened last Thursday and will continue until next Tuesday, through which the two parties hope to strengthen bilateral relations and trade exchanges between the two countries.
The exhibition of 170 Algerian economic operators in the capital Nouakchott is another chance to increase the presence of Algerian products in the Mauritanian market as part of Algeria's new strategy to increase its exports outside hydrocarbons and to improve its trade exchanges with Mauritania.
Today we are in our second country to organize the largest trade exhibition of Algerian companies in Nouakchott, with the participation of more than 170 Algerian companies from different sectors.
Algeria reiterates its full readiness to expand its business relations with Mauritania and its will to seal investment contracts with the neighboring country based on win-win principle.
This will be an opportunity to bring together businessmen from both countries to discuss the development of the two countries' relations. We also informed the president of the meeting to be held on Saturday between Algerian businessmen and their Mauritanian brothers, and which will be an opportunity to discuss means of developing bilateral relations, especially since the conditions are met and the bonds between the two presidents are very strong.
Over the past 3 years, there has been a noticeable increase in the value of trade between Algeria and Mauritania. During the last 10 months, it has reached more than $108 million, up from $25 million in 2019.
To a different story now, Tunisian President Mr. Kais Saied said, quote, "Only Tunisian people can diagnose all conditions and determine prescriptions for medicine to face all challenges," end quote. Tunisia has participated in the Davos Forum, and the meetings of the Tunisian delegation made it possible to clarify the reality of the economic and financial conditions in the country. To Libya now, the disagreement between the House of Representatives and the High Council of State over the final outstanding details of enforcing the constitutional rule organizing the general elections resulted in a deadlock to which 49 presidential candidates proposed a new initiative to end it. The initiative suggests electing institutions whose legitimacy comes from popular vote and freezing all political institutions whose existence has become a reason for obstructing the political transition process, that is. It also suggests giving power to the Supreme Judicial Council to organize a thorough electoral process before the end of this year. Still in Africa, on Friday, the Chadian government lifted the suspension imposed 3 months ago on the activities of a number of opposition parties, accusing them of disrupting public order during demonstrations that commenced on October 20th, headed by Mohamed Idriss Deby, in which 50 people were killed and more than 300 were injured in N'Djamena, according to officials. In a statement, the Chadian authorities called on political parties to retake their activities, however, strictly adhering to the legislation in force from now on. According to a report on Burkina Faso State Television Friday, 66 women and children kidnapped by armed attackers in northern Burkina Faso last week have been freed. The mass kidnapping was unprecedented in the African country. The report said that the armed forces had located the hostages during a military operation in Center-North region and took them to Ouagadougou, the capital of the country. To a different development now. UN Deputy Secretary General met Afghanistan's acting foreign minister on Wednesday to discuss women's education and work after Taliban authorities ordered most female NGO workers to stop work and barred them from attending universities. Salman Sib with the report.
Mohamed Amina, the UN's top-ranking female official, described the current laws on women's education and workplace as an aberration to the teaching of Islam, but highlighted the need to engage with the Taliban.
There has been some progress. Some exemptions have been made to the edicts that have covered the health sector. I think that's because the international community, and particularly the partners who are funding this, were able to show the implications and the impact of the woman-to-woman services, particularly childbirth.
Cushioning remains to be achieved. The Deputy Secretary General, therefore, held talks with senior Taliban officials in Afghanistan and made headway on women's rights. The 61-year-old UN diplomat said her delegation met with the cabinet members, including the foreign minister, deputy prime minister, and minister of refugees and returnees. The high-level meeting earlier this week comes amid widespread criticism of Taliban for banning women from universities and NGOs last month. Millions of high school girls have already been confined to their homes as schools remain shut.
I was always very clear that I'm going there as an opportunity to air the voices of Afghanistan, as an opportunity to air the voices of Afghan women. We heard from young women who said, "We do not need your voice. What we need is you amplify ours."
The group also met the governor of Kandahar as well as the Shura, who is the leadership council that is responsible for taking many key decisions in the country. And according to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the humanitarian crisis in the country were affecting 28 million people.
To Europe now. Thousands of people protested against Spain's socialist government, who they accuse of undermining the Spanish constitution in central Madrid on Saturday. The rally was called by over 100 associations under the slogan "For Spain, for Democracy and the Constitution." To protest against issues protesters believe are threatening the Spanish constitution, including separatism in Catalonia.
I came because of the slogan on the podium, for Spain, for democracy, for the Constitution, to defend the current Spain, which allows us to live in freedom, which is the Spain that was born with the Constitution of 1978, that has allowed us to live many years of democracy, and which I believe must be defended, because right now could be in danger.
I think it was necessary to come and say enough is enough. The important thing is that we get out of this economic crisis that we have so important, and that money is not spent on superfluous things that do not matter to the Spanish people.
EU envoy for dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo, Miroslav Lajcak, visited Pristina and Belgrade on Friday as part of efforts to defuse tensions between the two countries. Lajcak met with Kosovo's Prime Minister Albin Kurti and Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić to move towards an agreement between the two Balkan countries that saw tensions rising over policies decided by Pristina toward ethnic Serbs in Kosovo. Serbs in Kosovo want to create an association of majority Serbs municipalities that would operate with greater autonomy.
We had expected better understanding of the opportunities this proposal offers. I hope we will get there to full understanding and full use of the potential of this proposal. We are going to continue to work on this.
An indifferent development, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said on Saturday that he hopes Swedish authorities would not allow a protest that includes burning the Quran. Çavuşoğlu also said the protest could not be classified as freedom of expression. Earlier on Saturday, Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said a planned visit next week by his Swedish counterpart to Ankara had been cancelled after Swedish authorities granted permission for protesters in Stockholm to protest against the embassy of Turkey burning the Quran.
Unfortunately, this permission is granted to this person. Despite all our warnings, this vile act will take place at around 4 to 7 Turkish time. I hope Swedish authorities will take necessary measures until then and will not allow this, because this will create uproar around the world, and this is a vile, racist act, which also is a hate crime.
We've been following the process regarding this visit. As you are aware, we observed that there had been no reactions from the Swedish administration. and mean actions against Turkey and our president. At this point, the visit of Swedish Defense Minister Paul Johnson to Turkey on January 27th has become meaningless and has no importance. That is why we cancelled the visit.
To the latest development on the Russia-Ukraine file, the German defense minister has announced that no decision has yet been taken on the possible delivery of Leopard tanks that claimed by Ukraine since last March. Meanwhile, the US top official said it's not possible to eject Russia from Ukrainian territories in 2023. Islam Sid with more details.
Ukraine's Western allies failed to reach an agreement to deliver heavy tanks to Ukraine, as they tried to convince Germany, whose chancellor remains undecided. Dozens of Ukrainian refugees, including their supporters, protested in front of the federal chancellery in Berlin on Friday night, calling for the German government to send the Leopard tanks to Ukraine.
Yes, I am demonstrating here because I am disappointed that the Ukraine is still not getting the weapons. They need to win this war, to end this terrible war, and I think that they need more tanks. I never would have thought that I would ever protest for tanks.
As the talks concluded, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky acknowledged Kiev will have to keep fighting to ensure it has enough heavy armor. But he said the Ramstein meeting, which ended with billions of dollars in commitments, will strengthen Ukraine's resilience.
Today's Ramstein will strengthen our resilience. Our partners are principled in their approach. They will support Ukraine as long as necessary for our victory. Yes, we will still have to fight for the supply of modern tanks. But every day we make it more obvious that there is no alternative to the fact that the decision on tanks must be taken.
On the same development, the top US General Mark Milley said he did not think Ukrainian forces could remove all Russian troops from parts of Ukraine that they had taken.
From a military standpoint, I still maintain that for this year, it would be very, very difficult to militarily eject the Russian forces from every inch of Ukrainian-occupied or Russian-occupied Ukraine.
The Kremlin spokesperson said Western countries supplying additional tanks to Ukraine would not change the course of the conflict, and that they would add to the problems of the Ukrainian people.
Chris Hipkins, who led New Zealand's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, is set to replace Jacinda Ardern as the country's next prime minister. Hipkins is expected to be confirmed as the new leader at a meeting of Labour's 64 lawmakers, or caucus, on Sunday, after emerging as the only candidate nominated to lead the party. And for the first time in 2 years without COVID-19 restrictions, Chinese families have finally gathered on Saturday for the traditional Lunar New Year's Eve dinner. Sofian Kinturi in this report.
Chinese are celebrating the Lunar New Year after 3 years of absence because of COVID-19 restrictions. Foreign travelers, along with Chinese nationals, are flocking to China to celebrate. The New Year's holiday might be the only time of the year when the city workers visit their own families in their hometowns.
Business this year is okay. The pandemic has slowed down. Next year is the year of the dragon, so I am expecting better business. My stock is almost gone, only very little left. Thank you. Happy New Year to you all.
Chinese government anticipates that during the 40-day period surrounding the holiday, there will be about 2.1 billion journeys as people rush home for the traditional family dinner gathering on the eve of the New Year.
For many Chinese, New Year means reunion, means to get people, families to get together. It's about time after 3 years of pandemic, and I think more importantly, people wants to get up, wants to feel the atmosphere. So this is a good time where families get together and be with their relatives and friends.
It's only natural that such events had been suspended under recently eased COVID curbs, rising fears of fresh outbreaks in rural areas, less equipped to manage large outbreaks. In fact, the mass movement of people during this holiday period might spread the pandemic, boosting infections in some areas, but a second COVID wave is unlikely in the near term.
To a different story now, independent lawmakers in Lebanon are staging a sitting at parliament to pile pressure on dominant factions to elect a new president, nearly 3 months since the post fell vacant, with the country in the throes of an economic crisis. The currency collapsed on Thursday to a new record low of 50,000 Lebanese pounds to the dollar. marking a devaluation of more than 95% since 2019 that has impoverished the whole nation. The head of the Brazilian army has been sacked by the country's new president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, after claims that the commander tried to shield right-wing rioters from arrest after the 8th of January insurrection in Brasilia. Julio Cesar de Arruda, who only took up the role in late December, was removed from his position on Saturday, nearly 2 weeks, after supporters of the former right President Jair Bolsonaro brought havoc to Brazil's capital in what Lula's administration called a botched coup attempt. During an exclusive interview with Chinese media outlet, Argentine President Alberto Fernandez said his government's efforts to deal with various difficulties over the past few years have helped the country's economy get through a difficult period and return to the right path. Fernandez claimed that since taking office in the late 2019, Argentina has faced challenges due to the nation's high inflation and debt crisis.
En el año 2021 la Argentina creció 10,3%.
In 2021, our economy grew by 10.3%, and we expect the growth rate at around 5.7% this year. This is exciting news, indicating we are on the right path. We have increased our foreign exchange reserves, which is key to development. When he took office, the Central Bank of Argentina had no foreign exchange reserves at all. By the end of the last year, we had $8 billion of foreign exchange reserves at disposal. This gave us a relief and allowed us to set sight on the growth of next year.
In Latin America still, tensions flared again in Peru on Friday night as police clashed with protesters in capital Lima in anti-government demonstrations that are spreading across the country. Police officers used tear gas to repel demonstrators, throwing glass bottles and stones as fires burned in the streets, and thousands of protesters descended on the city calling for change and angered by the protests mounting death toll, which rose to 45 on Thursday.
A stronger march could come, yes. This one was not as strong. For example, the March of the Cuatro Soyos, the one against Toledo, ended with the burning of the Bank of the Nation. And the march which took place to Ustviskara was stronger than this one.
I was safe at home. The march was passing. I was protected from tear gas. I was waiting for it to end, and I was waiting for it to end, when suddenly I felt fire on the roof. I said, there is fire, there is fire. Imagine the trouble started then, the despair started.
For more news making headlines around the world, here's the news in brief by Zahra Farjani.
Tens of thousands of Zionists joined demonstrations on Saturday against judicial reform plans by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's new government that protesters say will threaten democratic checks and balances on ministers by the court. Thousands of people took to the streets of the Portuguese capital Lisbon on Saturday to give animals a voice as the Constitutional Court ponders if mistreating pets should be classed as a crime. Portugal's public prosecutor had on Wednesday asked the Constitutional Court to declare unconstitutional a law that criminalizes with a fine or jail time those who mistreat their pets. In France, hundreds of people took part in a collection action on a beach in Loire-Atlantique to denounce the pollution of plastic microbeads washed up there and on other beaches in northwestern France in recent weeks. Tanzania's main opposition party, Chadema, is holding its first mass rally since lifting a ban in 2016, raising hopes for greater political freedom in the East African nation. President Samia Suluhu Hassan this month lifted the ban on Chadema, enforced by her hardline predecessor, John Magufuli.
And finally, to some sports news. Algeria has qualified for the next round of the Africa Nations Cup Championship for locals, CHAN, topping Group A following its victory over Mozambique 1-0 by the player Hussein Hiri in the 7th minute of the match. Meanwhile, the second match was held in the same group simultaneously between Libya and Ethiopia, which marked the victory of Libyan national team with 3-1 It's worth mentioning that Libya lost the first 2 rounds to Algeria and Mozambique. Well, that's it for today's news. Thank you for keeping it here on our channel. For more, do visit our social media platforms as well as our website. Take care.